The desert outside Dubai holds many secrets.
Not every
On the
secret
surface, it's a
stays buried
vast,
in the
beautiful
desert.
emptiness, a sea of gold and bronze under the relentless sun. But beneath the shifting sands, some secrets are too dark to stay buried forever. This is a story that begins and ends in that desert, a story of a gilded cage, a forbidden key, and a silence more powerful than any scream. A group of travelers, explorers searching for a moment of peace far from the city's glittering chaos, found one of those secrets. Their eyes, accustomed to the endless waves of sand, noticed something wrong. A patch of earth that looked disturbed, out of place, as if the desert itself had a wound that hadn't quite healed. A feeling, a primal instinct, told them to look closer. When they dug, their curiosity turned to horror, their adventure into a nightmare. They uncovered a shallow, unmarked grave. And inside, wrapped in the earth's cold embrace, was the body of a woman. Her expensive gown, now torn and stained, was a grotesque parody of its former elegance. The glittering jewelry on her wrist was a cruel monument to a life that had ended in terror and isolation. Her name was Marina Al-Sayed. To the world, she was a symbol of luxury and beauty, a woman who possessed everything the modern world could offer. But her life of unimaginable privilege had ended here, in a lonely, hidden grave, a secret meant to be erased by the desert wind. This is not just a story of an affair or a murder. This is the story of how a woman's search for connection in a world of cold luxury led her into the orbit of one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the city, a man for whom love was a transaction and betrayal was a capital offense. It's a story about the deadly cost of threatening a reputation, and the terrifying architecture of power that ensures some secrets never see the light of justice. Hey everyone, and a massive welcome to my viewers across the USA and around the world. A special shout out to those of you joining us from Texas, California, Florida, New York, and Illinois. I see you in the comments, and I'm thrilled to have you here. This is the channel dedicated to uncovering the stories that powerful people hope you'll never hear. We are the voice for the silenced, the light shining into the darkest corners of crime and corruption. If you're new here, you've come to the right place. We dive deep into investigations that others are too afraid to touch, exposing the grim truths hidden behind glamorous facades and the deadly consequences of crossing those who believe they are untouchable. Before we unravel the chilling details of how Marina Al-Sayed's life of luxury ended in a desert grave, I want to know who's with me on this journey. This story becomes profoundly personal when you realize the killer wasn't a shadowy stranger in an alley, but a man so deeply entrenched in the systems of power that he was considered above the law, a man who moved through the highest echelons of society with impunity. So, if you're watching from anywhere, from a bustling city apartment to a quiet suburban home, I want you to pause for a second and drop a comment right now. Tell me your name and your city. I read every single one, and I make a point of giving a shout out to our incredible community in each new video. Let's build this network of truth seekers, the people who are not afraid to question the official narrative and look beyond the glittering surface. Now, if you've ever believed that immense wealth and high social status are an impenetrable shield against danger, the story of Marina Al-Sayed will shatter that illusion into a million pieces. This is a case that exposes the brutal price of threatening a powerful man's reputation, and the cold, calculated machinery that springs into action to protect that power, no matter the human cost. To understand the tragedy of Marina Al-Sayed, you must first understand the world she inhabited. Imagine a life of almost unimaginable material splendor. A sprawling, palatial villa in one of Dubai's most exclusive enclaves, its architecture a testament to modern opulence. Inside, marble floors imported from Italy gleamed under crystal chandeliers. The walls were adorned with rare and expensive art, each piece chosen by a world-renowned curator. The air was perpetually scented with jasmine and oud, pumped through a discreet climate control system that maintained a perfect temperature regardless of the blistering heat outside. Outside her windows, manicured private gardens unfolded, a green oasis in the desert, complete with swimming pools that seemed to merge with the horizon and fountains that danced to programmed light shows every evening. In the driveway, a fleet of luxury cars sat gleaming, a white Bentley, a custom Range Rover, a sleek Ferrari for rare weekend drives along the coast. Marina Al-Sayed was the queen of this domain. Her social media presence, a carefully curated portfolio of her existence, painted the picture of a modern-day fairy tale. There were photos of her at lavish charity galas, dressed in haute couture, smiling alongside celebrities and diplomats. There were snapshots from luxury holidays, skiing in St. Moritz, sailing in the south of France, shopping on Rodeo Drive. Her life, through the lens of Instagram, was a relentless parade of five-star hotels, designer shopping bags, and flawless beauty. She was an icon, an influencer before the term was even coined, and thousands of followers looked at her life with a mixture of awe and envy. But behind the filters and the flawless facade, her reality was profoundly different. The palace was often a prison. Her husband, a hugely successful and ambitious businessman whose empire spanned construction, import-export, and telecommunications, was the ghost in the machine of her life. He had provided every material comfort imaginable, but he himself was a phantom presence. His life was a whirlwind of international meetings, conference calls that spanned time zones, and negotiations that kept him away for weeks, sometimes months, at a time. His love was expressed through bank transfers and the arrival of new, expensive gifts, not through presents or conversation. Marina's life began to feel like a beautifully decorated, impeccably maintained cage. She had the freedom to spend astronomical sums of money, the freedom to host extravagant parties for hundreds of people, the freedom to travel anywhere in the world on a private jet. But she had no freedom from the crushing, deafening silence that filled her home when the guests left and the staff retired to their quarters. She had no freedom to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel truly loved for who she was beyond her beauty and her husband's wealth. The emptiness, at first a faint whisper of dissatisfaction, grew over time into a constant, heavy weight that followed her from room to room in her vast, empty house. Friends who envied her life, who imagined she woke every day in a dream, didn't see the long, lonely afternoons she spent wandering the hallways like a ghost. They didn't see the quiet evenings when she ate dinner at a table meant for 12, served by a silent butler, with no one sitting beside her to ask about her day. She tried to fill the void with distractions, endless shopping sprees where the thrill lasted only until the next purchase. Exclusive beauty treatments that offered temporary rejuvenation, high-profile charity work that provided a semblance of purpose. But nothing could silence the aching loneliness that had taken root in her soul. It was in this hollow space, in the quiet desperation of a woman starving for genuine connection, that her story began to take a dark and dangerous turn. The very luxury that defined her life became the stage for her downfall. The night Marina first met Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansour seemed, in retrospect, less like chance and more like fate setting a tragic trap. It was at a charity gala held in the ballroom of one of Dubai's most exclusive 7-star hotels. The event was a spectacle of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast 1,000,000 points of light on the guests below, women draped in diamonds and silk, men in impeccably tailored tuxedos. Marina attended out of social obligation, dressed in a stunning emerald green gown, her smile a perfectly practiced accessory. She expected the evening to be like all the others, a cycle of polite, superficial conversations, staged photographs for the society pages, and the empty, ringing laughter that echoed in these grand rooms. But when Sheikh Rashid entered, the atmosphere in the ballroom palpably shifted. It wasn't a loud entrance, it was a wave of quiet authority that rolled through the crowd. All eyes, instinctively, turned toward him. He was a man in his late 40s, with a commanding presence that had little to do with his height or build and everything to do with the aura of absolute control that surrounded him. Politicians deferred to him. Billionaires sought his approval. Whispers of his influence traveled across the room on a current of hushed reverence and fear. Stories of his control over vast swathes of land, of government contracts that required his blessing, of fortunes made and broken on his word. Marina, accustomed to being noticed for her beauty, was struck by the quality of his attention. When his gaze found her across the crowded room, it was not a casual glance of appreciation. It was deliberate, intense, and assessing, as if he had already identified her, categorized her, and chosen her. That night, introductions were made through mutual acquaintances, powerful people who were eager to gain favor with the Sheikh. Their conversation was brief, a matter of minutes, but it was charged with a subtext that vibrated between them. He didn't speak to her like she was just another beautiful socialite. He spoke to her as an equal, asking pointed questions about her opinions, her interests, things her own husband hadn't bothered to ask in years. In that short, electrifying moment, Marina felt something she had been missing for a decade, a tension that was powerful, focused, and intoxicatingly dangerous. What began after that night was a carefully choreographed dance of discretion and desire. It started with a discreet phone call to her private line from an unknown number. Then, a driver would arrive to take her to a location not for the public, a private lounge atop a skyscraper, a secluded villa on the Palm Jumeirah, a suite in a hotel booked under a false name. The arrangements were flawless, designed to leave no trace. For Marina, every secret meeting was a jolt of adrenaline, a reawakening. The thrill of the forbidden was a potent drug. She felt alive, desired, and powerful in a way she had never felt before. She was no longer just Marina, the lonely wife of a busy businessman. She was Marina, the secret passion of one of the most powerful men in the Middle East. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that Sheikh Rashid was her salvation, her escape from the gilded cage. But she was tragically, fatally mistaken. What she saw as a passionate romance, he saw as a temporary diversion, an entertaining affair with a beautiful woman who understood the rules of their world. She was a prized object in his collection, and he was a man who was used to controlling everything in his orbit. He would decide when the affair began, and he would decide, unilaterally, when it ended. As the weeks bled into months, Marina's secret life began to grow more difficult to contain. At first, she believed she was clever enough, sophisticated enough, to manage the double life. She returned home from her clandestine meetings with Rashid with carefully rehearsed explanations for her staff and any inquiring friends. She had been at a prolonged luncheon, a last-minute shopping trip, a planning meeting for a charity event. Her household staff, well-trained and discreet, carried out their duties without overt question, but in a world built on service, the servants always notice what their employers overlook. The changes were subtle but telling. Her more frequent late-night returns, the faint trace of a cologne that was not her husband's clinging to her clothes, the sudden, renewed care she took in her appearance even for simple, mundane errands. Whispers began to form in the hushed corridors of her home, and soon, those whispers traveled beyond the villa's walls. Her circle of friends, women who thrived on the currency of gossip, started asking quiet, probing questions among themselves. Why was Marina, who had been so visibly restless, now suddenly so radiant and preoccupied? Why was she so often absent during times she was usually at home? Though none dared to confront her directly, the cloud of suspicion was growing, a storm gathering on her perfect horizon. And then there was her husband. A man too preoccupied with the expansion of his empire to involve himself deeply in the day-to-day nuances of his wife's life, yet not entirely blind. He noticed her increasing, unexplained absences. He sensed a new distance in her eyes when he spoke to her during his brief visits home. His instincts, the same ones that served him so well in business, told him something was fundamentally wrong. Though he chose, for the time being, to bury the unsettling thought beneath a mountain of work and international travel, unwilling to face the humiliating truth that might be revealed. But the true, existential danger was not the gossip or her husband's dawning suspicions. The true danger was Rashid himself. He was a man whose power was not just financial, it was political, social, and, as Marina would discover, absolute. For him, their affair was an indulgence, a pleasurable pastime that was fleeting and ultimately disposable. For Marina, it had become the emotional core of her existence, an escape she clung to with a desperate intensity. The imbalance in their investment was stark, but she blinded herself to it, seeing only what she wanted to see. What she failed to comprehend, a failure that would cost her everything, was that men like Rashid lived by a simple, brutal code, loyalty above all else. Secrets were to be kept, not shared. And betrayal, even the slightest hint of it, was a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. It was a transgression that demanded the most severe response. Marina, a woman who had been accustomed to getting what she wanted through charm and beauty, began to crave more from Rashid than stolen moments and whispered endearments. The initial flush of passion began to transform into something harder, more ambitious. She started weaving elaborate fantasies of a new life for herself, a life where she was not just the hidden mistress of a powerful man, but his publicly acknowledged companion, his wife. She imagined herself stepping into a position of unparalleled influence, with a level of wealth and recognition that extended far beyond anything her husband could provide. These fantasies consumed her waking hours, and in time, they curdled into tangible demands. At first, her requests, while extravagant, seemed to fit within the parameters of their arrangement. She asked Rashid for gifts that dwarfed anything she had ever received, a rare, flawless pink diamond necklace, a private weekend trip to a secluded island in the Seychelles where no paparazzi could ever find them, access to ultra-exclusive, invitation-only parties where the guest list included royalty and global tech titans. But soon, the nature of her requests shifted. They became heavier, more consequential. She began to press him for security, for a concrete promise that he would eventually leave his own life and take her away from hers. She wanted a guarantee, a signed, unbreakable contract on their future. She needed to know that she would no longer have to play the role of the lonely housewife waiting in her silent palace. In her growing desperation, Marina began to make a series of catastrophic miscalculations. She started to subtly, then not so subtly, remind him that she knew things. That their secret wasn't just her secret, but his as well. She hinted that she had kept diaries, that she had confided in a single, trusted, and entirely fictional friend. It was a veiled threat, a clumsy attempt at leverage from a woman who was utterly out of her depth. What she saw as a strategic move to secure her future was, in the cold, calculating eyes of Sheikh Rashid, an act of unforgivable treachery. He was not a man who tolerated pressure. He was not a man who was ever threatened. To him, Marina was rapidly transforming from a thrilling, beautiful distraction into a clear and present liability. A problem. The more she pushed, the more her pleading turned to demanding, the thinner his patience stretched. The charming, attentive lover began to recede, replaced by a colder, more detached and calculating figure. In her desperation, Marina failed to see the warning signs for what they were: the growing chill in his responses, the increasing delays in his replies to her messages, the way his once frequent invitations for clandestine meetings became fewer and farther between. Always with a plausible, business-related excuse. To a man like Rashid, threats were not challenges to be negotiated, they were problems to be eliminated. Permanently. Marina, without realizing it, had just signed her own death sentence. The night Marina Al-Sayed vanished from the face of the earth began like so many of her previous secret assignations. She dressed with meticulous precision, selecting a dress that was both elegant and deeply alluring, a deep crimson that spoke of passion and danger. She informed her household staff that she would be spending the evening with a close friend who was going through a difficult divorce, a cover story she had used before and one that was designed to elicit sympathy and discourage further questions. Her personal driver, a man paid for his discretion as much as his skill, was instructed to take her to a renowned, opulent hotel in the heart of the financial district, a place known for its discretion and its clientele of wealthy, anonymous guests. Security cameras at the hotel captured her arrival, a vision of confidence and anticipation as she glided through the polished lobby, her high heels clicking a rhythm of impending doom on the marble floor before she disappeared into the elevator heading for the upper suites. Hours later, the same cameras captured her leaving. But this time, she was not alone. She walked beside Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansour, their bodies close, their heads bent together as if in intense, hushed conversation. His expression was grim, focused. Hers was harder to read, a mixture of hope, anxiety, and determination. At the hotel's discreet entrance, a sleek, blacked-out SUV with tinted windows waited, its engine purring. The vehicle was registered to a complex web of shell companies, a ghost car that ultimately traced back to associates of Rashid's vast corporate empire. Marina, after a moment's hesitation, climbed inside. Rashid followed. The door closed with a soft, final thud. From that moment forward, no one outside that vehicle ever saw Marina Al-Sayed alive again. The car pulled away from the curb, merged into the river of nighttime traffic, and drove, not towards the glittering lights of the marina or the familiar streets of her neighborhood, but out, towards the vast, dark, and silent desert. When she failed to return home that night, her husband initially assumed she had simply decided to spend the night at her friend's villa, something she had done on rare occasions after an evening of drinking and conversation. But as the morning stretched into the afternoon with no word from her, no response to his text messages, a low thrum of worry began to gnaw at him. He called her private mobile number repeatedly, only to be met each time by the cold, automated message that the phone was switched off. By evening, a quiet panic had begun to replace his initial irritation. He started making calls, to the friend she was supposed to be with, to her other close acquaintances, to the boutiques she frequented. No one had seen her. The fear solidified into a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He contacted the Dubai police, reporting his wife, Marina Al-Sayed, a prominent socialite, as a missing person. The case immediately attracted a level of attention reserved for the city's elite. Disappearances in such wealthy, powerful circles were rare, scandalous, and potentially destabilizing. The media, sensing a story that mixed glamour, mystery, and danger, seized upon it with gusto. Marina's carefully curated Instagram photos were now splashed across news websites and television broadcasts, the narrative painting her as the beautiful, enigmatic wife who had vanished into the thin desert air without a trace. Speculation ran rampant in the absence of facts. Had she been the victim of a sophisticated kidnapping for ransom? Had she, tired of her gilded life, orchestrated her own disappearance to start anew somewhere else? Or, the most tantalizing and sinister theory of all, was something more darkly personal at play? Behind the scenes, a team of investigators was assembled. They began the painstaking work of piecing together her final hours. They combed through surveillance footage from her neighborhood, from hotels, from traffic cameras. They pulled her phone records and credit card statements. And with each piece of data they uncovered, the mystery only deepened, the shadow of Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansour growing longer and darker over the investigation. The last confirmed trace of Marina was that black SUV. Beyond that, The digital and physical trail didn't just go cold, it seemed to have been surgically erased. For weeks, the search for Marina continued, but hope of finding her alive began to fade like a desert mirage. The initial media frenzy began to subside, replaced by a grim, waiting silence. Then, far from the air-conditioned conference rooms and the buzzing news desks, a discovery was made that shattered the mystery and confirmed everyone's darkest fears. A group of European travelers, adventure seekers who had ventured deep into the desert for a night of camping under the stars, stumbled upon something that shouldn't have been there. In a remote area, miles from the nearest road, a patch of sand looked wrong. It was disturbed, uneven, and slightly sunken, as if the earth beneath had recently been turned. Driven by a morbid curiosity, they began to dig with their hands, their casual interest quickly turning to stomach-churning horror as their fingers brushed against something that was not rock, not plant, but fabric. They dug more frantically, and soon uncovered the horrifying truth: a shallow, makeshift grave. And inside, wrapped in a cheap, coarse blanket, were the remains of Marina Al-Sayed. Her expensive crimson dress was torn and stained with dirt. The once vibrant woman was now a lifeless, waxy shell, abandoned to the elements. The discovery sent seismic shockwaves through the city. The glamorous socialite, whose image had been synonymous with luxury and beauty, had met a fate of such brutal, degrading violence that it was almost impossible to comprehend. Her death became the only headline, with haunting images of the desolate desert grave site broadcast around the world. The story gripped the public imagination, not just because of her status, but because of the terrifying, stark contrast between her life of extreme excess and her lonely, hidden death in the sand. The official investigation into Marina's murder, which had once been a search for a missing person, now became a homicide case. And on paper, the evidence quickly formed a compelling, almost obvious, picture. The black SUV was traced back to Rashid's network. Detailed phone records, obtained through a secret court order, showed that his personal mobile phone had pinged off a cell tower deep in the desert, in the precise vicinity of the grave site, on the very night Marina disappeared. The timeline was airtight. The motive, a mistress who had become a threatening liability, was classic and clear. Hotel staff, under gentle but persistent questioning, confirmed that the two had been together for several hours in a private suite. Each clue, each data point, seemed to point an unwavering finger in one direction. But then, something began to happen within the investigation. It was a subtle shift at first, almost imperceptible, like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Witnesses who had initially been cooperative, who had provided crucial statements, suddenly developed faulty memories. They retracted their previous accounts, often through tersely worded letters from high-priced lawyers. Key physical evidence, files that had been logged into the evidence room, inexplicably went missing. Critical surveillance footage from cameras near Rashid's properties, footage that investigators were certain would provide the final piece of the puzzle, was suddenly declared corrupted or unrecoverable due to a technical malfunction. Each promising lead, each piece of damning evidence, was systematically neutralized, not by a lack of evidence, but by an invisible, pervasive force that seemed to be working against the investigation from the inside. Behind closed doors. In hushed conversations, investigators admitted to each other what was becoming painfully clear to everyone involved. Sheikh Rashid's influence was not a rumor, it was a tangible, active force. His power stretched deep into the very institutions that were meant to be pursuing justice: the police, the judiciary, the media. To accuse him openly was not just a career ender, it was a potentially life-threatening act. Those detectives and prosecutors who showed too much zeal, who asked the wrong questions in the wrong rooms, found themselves abruptly reassigned to meaningless desk jobs, their authority stripped away. The official narrative, once firmly focused on Rashid, began to subtly shift. New, alternative theories were floated in press briefings. Perhaps Marina had been targeted by international criminals seeking a ransom. Perhaps her death was the result of a personal dispute with someone from her past, an enemy of her husband's. The possibility of Rashid's direct involvement, once the central theory, was slowly, deliberately, airbrushed out of the public picture. For Marina's family, this wall of silence was a second, more profound death. Her husband, though a wealthy and powerful man in his own right, lacked the deep, systemic, generational power that Rashid commanded. He found his own influence neutralized at every turn. His friends in high places suddenly became unavailable. His business began to suffer from mysterious regulatory delays. Her socialite friends, who had once eagerly dissected every detail of her scandalous affair in hushed, excited tones, now avoided the subject entirely, their eyes filled with a new emotion, fear. The city, which had been utterly captivated by her disappearance and murder, now slowly began to treat the case as a tragic, but ultimately unsolvable, mystery. In reality, her death had become more than a crime of passion. It was a brutal, public demonstration of how absolute power could erase truth, manipulate justice, and ensure that accountability was a concept for other people, in other places. Marina was gone, and with her, any real chance for justice vanished into the desert air. In the years that followed Marina Al-Sayed's murder, her story slowly faded from the daily headlines, but it never truly disappeared from the collective memory of the city's elite. In the gilded salons and at the exclusive charity balls, her name became a whisper, a cautionary tale spoken only behind cupped hands and in the most trusted of company. No one dared to openly accuse Sheikh Rashid al-Mansur, yet an unspoken understanding permeated the highest circles of society. Everyone knew. The circumstances of her death were too precise, too clean, too perfectly orchestrated to be anything other than a message. It was a stark reminder to everyone of the rules of this world. Those who cross the truly powerful can vanish, their lives and their stories erased as easily as footprints in the desert sand. Her husband, broken by a grief compounded by public humiliation and impotent rage, eventually retreated from public life altogether. The scandal, which he could not control or suppress, weakened his standing in the business community. He quietly, methodically, began to sell off his assets in Dubai before eventually leaving the emirate altogether, a ghost himself, fleeing the scene of his wife's murder and the system that had allowed her killer to walk free. The friends who had once competed for invitations to Marina's legendary parties, who had envied her clothes and her lifestyle, now avoided mentioning her name altogether. For them, her story was not simply one of betrayal or personal tragedy. It was a terrifying lesson about the limits of their own privilege, about the invisible hierarchy of power that governed their world, and about how the truth itself could be purchased, rewritten, and buried. For Sheikh Rashid al-Mansur, life continued utterly untouched by the scandal. He remained a fixture at the most important economic summits, was photographed shaking hands with world leaders, and continued to expand his business empire across continents as if nothing had ever happened. His unassailable presence in the aftermath of Marina's death was, in itself, his most powerful statement. It was a daily reminder that immense wealth and influence could construct an impervious shield against consequence, that some people truly did live by a different set of rules. The silence that followed Marina's death became his ultimate weapon, ensuring that no one else would ever dare to challenge him, to threaten him, or to step out of line. Yet, beneath the glittering, polished surface of Dubai, Marina's story left a permanent, hidden scar. It was retold in hushed, sober voices by those who remembered her loneliness, her desperate longing for freedom and connection, and the horrific price she had ultimately paid for it. Her life had been a masterpiece of privilege, but her death revealed the darker, brutal truth that underpinned it all. In a world ruled by absolute power, justice was a fragile illusion, and silence could bury even the most shocking and brutal of crimes. The story of Marina Al-Sayed is a stark and sobering lesson in the brutal architecture of power. It shows us that the face of true evil isn't always a grotesque monster. Sometimes it's the face of a charming, sophisticated man in a tailored suit, a man who operates from a penthouse office and moves through the highest corridors of influence. It's a chilling reminder that justice is not an inherent right, but a fragile commodity, and for those who challenge the established order, the price can be the ultimate one. This is the very heart of what we do on this channel. We are the voice for the silenced. We are the ones who dig up the secrets that the powerful have worked so hard to bury. We shine a light into the darkest corners of human behavior, no matter how frightening what we find may be. If this in-depth investigation into a murder without consequence, into a life stolen without accountability, has gripped you, then you understand why this work is so important. Here is how you can become a part of this mission and help us continue to uncover the truth. First, if you haven't already, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and that you have hit the notification bell. We are already deep into our next investigation, another shocking story of crime, corruption, and the abuse of power that you will not want to miss. Your subscription is your vote for this kind of fearless journalism, and it ensures you'll be the first to know when we break open our next case. Second, I genuinely want to hear from you in the comments below. This is a complex and deeply haunting case. What part of it disturbed you the most? Was it the sheer, brazen impunity of the killer? The chilling, systematic dismantling of the official investigation? Or was it Marina's own tragic miscalculation, her failure to see the deadly danger she was in until it was far too late? Let's discuss this as a community. And finally, and this is perhaps the most important step, please share this video. Share it with a friend. Share it with a family member. Share it on your social media. Awareness is the first and most powerful step toward accountability. Your share does more than just get us more views, it amplifies a story that powerful people wanted to erase. It gives a voice to a victim who can no longer speak for herself. It sends a message that we are watching, that we remember, and that we will not be silenced. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your courage in seeking out these difficult stories. Thank you for being a part of this growing community that believes in truth, justice, and the power of a voice that refuses to be quieted. Stay vigilant, question power, and never, ever forget the names of the forgotten. I'll see you in the next investigation.
Not every secret stays buried in the desert.